Hi guys, Squad here. Welcome back to the second part of this two-part build of your first simple boat, your first basic boat. In the first part, we brought the hull in from my Steam workshop, links in the video description, and we built this out. We built this tanks here, the battery, the diesel engine. We piped it all together with the clutch gearbox and generator and plumbed it all out to propellers which don't exist yet. So we are going to add a rudder and we're going to add some propellers. So let's add the rudder first. We're going to a little block space here, like that, and then we're going to go into here and look for rudder. Now, there are different kinds of rudder. There's a fin rudder, which you can put on the keel of the boat, or there's this one here, which is a straight-up rudder. This is the one we're going to use. The only thing to be careful of, if you like, is the arrow orientation. It doesn't make any practical difference, except that when you operate the controls, left and right will vary depending on which way you've got these arrows going. The other thing to note is this is where the editor can be a little bit fidgety. You notice I'm having trouble putting this down because what it's trying to do is center the 3x3 on the block that I'm looking at. I don't have a block to look at that's in the right place. So what I need to do is add a simple block just there, like that, and then go back to the rudder, and now when I look at that center block, it will drop in the right place. So we put that down, and you can see it's pointing in the correct direction. The thick side should be on this side, and the thin side, the fin, just like a fish really, should be trailing away. We'll get rid of that little block that we just made. We don't need that anymore. And that's the rudder in place. The next thing we need is the propeller. So we search for propeller, and at the moment we only have the small propeller. Later on we can get medium, large, and a giant propeller. It's absolutely massive, but of course that will need a lot of power to power it. Now, one thing to note is it says here on the small engine that the output power is 20,000 units. It doesn't tell you what the units are, 20,000 units. And the small propeller, the force, is 20,000 units. So you can more or less dictate that one of those will drive one of those. We've got one diesel engine in there, and we're driving two propellers, which means we won't be running this at its maximum. It means we'll have more pushing force than we'll have speed, but we'll be using a lot less fuel. That will do us initially, but later on, if you wanted to, you can add another diesel engine in there and make these things turn a bit quicker. Symmetry mode will go to X-axis because we're going to have to add a second one of these. Now what you want to do is make sure the pipe is at the back, and you want just that little black bit there just sticking out, just like that. So you've got two of them. The force arrows, which is what these are pointing forwards. It's going to propel the boat in that direction. That's the main thing to look at. There's nothing else to be done with those apart from wire them up. Now it's up to you, what color you want to make these things. I've got the boat lightly colored at the moment so we can see what we're doing. So later on you can come and paint this thing. For now we'll just put it in maybe a light gray or something and just turn this thing in like that. As long as it's plumbed in, it doesn't matter what color it is. And that's that. So now the propeller, which is force, is going through that pipe, comes out through this one here and goes into these propellers and will turn them, and the rudder, which we'll have to wire up later, will cause the boat to steer. That is it for the back end of the boat. So we've done all the other stuff. We need to focus our attention now on what's going on the cockpit. Now for this boat build, we're a little bit restricted because I'm playing this in career mode, so you can use this from the very beginning of a career build. It doesn't use any advanced stuff that you won't have it unlocked. But once you've got that stuff unlocked, you will want to add things in. First thing I want to do is, I'm going to turn symmetry mode off a second. First thing I want is what they call an indicator light. And an indicator light, I'll put it on white. An indicator light is quite literally that. It just lights up and tells you something. Whatever that something is up to you. But we're going to put one of these down, and we're going to put two of them down actually. One of them is going to tell us whether we're in high gear. Remember our gearbox? In other words, when we activate our gearbox high gear, it will light up when we're in the high gear, and the other one will light up when we're in reverse gear. Quite straightforward. If you click on the select tool, you can click on properties here like that, and you basically say, oh, this one's going to be for reverse, and this one's going to be for high gear. One thing you can do is paint. I haven't really showed you painting yet, but I'll briefly touch on it. So if you click on the paintbrush, you can then pick a color and you can paint things. That painted the whole plane because I had it on plain fill mode. So I'll just undo that. If we just go for brush mode, you can see you can individually color bits in, Control Z. And if you go for additive mode, that does something different. I'll just show you the differences here. If we leave it on brush mode, that will color the block face in. If we put it on additive mode, that will allow us to color in the actual bulb, the actual light. So we can say, oh, this is reverse gear, and perhaps this is high gear, or maybe orange for high gear. Whatever you choose, it's up to you. But they're just some of the different options on the brush, and you can choose this and pick custom colors. Go to town on it. Next thing we want is a couple of dials. Now, dials are useful when you want to see the position of something. They won't necessarily tell you numbers, but they will tell you the position of something. So, for example, on this one here, we can set the minimum and maximum range of something. For example, this one we could be the throttle, that, and then this one here could be the clutch. Now notice the value goes from -1 to 1. That is not uncommon. Now you may think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, a clutch can't go to -1. How does that work? Well, what's happening is there's two ways that you control the clutch. You can either use a throttle component, which is one of these things. Throttle lever, if you like, is a position slider. It can take its value in any minimum, maximum you want. And as you press that button there, the lever moves forward. As you press that button there, the lever moves backwards. And the range will go between whatever you set in here. That's one way of doing it. Perfectly valid. The other way of doing it is via this pilot seat. When you click on the pilot seat, which is this thing, you'll notice that I've got the up and down arrow keys set to throttle. Well, I've called it throttle. This is the same thing. When you put it on sticky mode, this is when you press the up and down arrow key on your keyboard, this will range between -1 and +1. It doesn't care what you're driving, it's just a range of number between -1 and +1. So if we hook that up to the engine, we can control the engine throttle with it, and it will send a signal from -1 all the way to 1. Now the engine will ignore everything beyond 0, like below 0, it won't care. When you get to 0, the engine will stop. But that's not the point. We need the dial to display whatever this is displaying. So we'll hook that up in a minute, but basically this throttle will be driven by these controls, and the same thing with the clutch. So just for now, we'll call it throttle and clutch. It will become a little bit clearer as we go through this, what that actually does. Okay, now we've got the indicator lights, and we've got throttle and clutch position indicators, dials, that we can actually see what's happening. We need a way of starting this boat. How do we actually start the engine? How do we actually turn on the lights, that kind of thing? Well, we're going to need some components. I'm just going to put them down here. So we're going to knock out these 4 blocks here, and we're going to have what's called breaker, or a circuit breaker, an electrical circuit breaker. These are quite common. You have an input and an output, and when you flick the switch, it makes a connection or breaks the connection. It's that simple. They're very, very, very useful for electrical systems. I like to have them because when they're in the off position, it stops the battery from being drained in any way. It completely turns off electrical power to any system, so therefore the battery definitely will not drain. Then we want a button. There's 2 kinds of button. There's a push button and a toggle button. For starting the engine, we want a push button. That means we push it, it activates. When we let go, it deactivates. With a toggle button, we push it, let go, it stays active until we push it again. It toggles, this pushes. So we'll put a push button in, like that. We also want a push button to control some other systems. Lighting in particular would be nice. So we'll put a couple more buttons in, like that. Now, since this is going to be a start button, I'm just going to color it green. If you remember, if you go to green, go to additive, that allows us to color this thing. These are just going to be display lights. So if you go to properties, this is going to be the main circuit breaker. Now, you could have more than one of these. You might have circuit breakers around your boat or your helicopter that control different systems. Default state will be off. You will have to throw this switch before you can start. And this is engine start. This one over here we'll call display lights. We'll come to that in a second. And this one we'll call boat lights, or lighting around the boat. I'm just putting in things that we're going to need in a minute. Final thing that we need is what's called an engine display. So just a display, I should say. This is a digital display. This can display numbers of things. Whatever number you send to it, it will display it. So we'll put that, say, we want that later. So we'll go there. We'll go there. Click on the properties of it, and we'll say this is fuel. So this is going to show how much fuel we have, and you can set the decimals however you want. 1 decimal place should be fine. How we calculate the fuel and display it is a different story, but we'll come to that in a second. So the last thing we need before we can start wiring everything together is some seating. We want some seating for when we rescue people. There's a passenger seat and there's a padded seat. This weighs 2, this weighs 6. These are much nicer. We've got plenty of space on the boat, but if you're strapped for space, you probably want to use the little padded seats. So we want to leave maybe like, I don't know, somewhere around here, and then here, and here. Turn off symmetry mode. So we're going to have ourselves 6 seats, and you might be asking, can you paint them? Absolutely, you can paint them. Well, then whatever color you like. There you go. So we can get in between, around the outsides, we can put passengers in there. Jobs are good. That is the basic boat now ready to be wired together. And the wiring bit is where this game starts to get much more interesting and in-depth. At the moment, it just looks like any other building game. But when we start to wire it together, this is where it becomes much more fun. Okay, systems time. This is where it's going to get interesting. Right, click on the logic up here. And you'll notice there's a whole bunch of tabs along this left side. Most of which we can ignore just for now. Let's focus first on electric. We click on this, it's going to show us electrical connections and electricity flow. All the power starts from the battery. So that's where we need to focus our attention. Now remember, we put a circuit breaker in here, and the circuit breaker, if you look at it properly, the circuit breaker has an input A and an output B. A to B. So the A is the inline. So that's going to come from the battery. So we click on this, drag to the battery, and that creates a connection. So the power from the battery now goes into the main breaker at A. B, which is when you throw the switch on the breaker, this is where everything connects out of here. So if you drag out of here, you can connect to this light. You can connect to this light. If you hold down the control key and do it, instead, what you can do is with the control key held down is you can just click, 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 and so on. So what that's done is it's had the battery go through a bit like a light switch. When you flick the switch, all of these will come on. Now you notice then when I hovered over that, it showed in white what it's connected to, and in yellow, I missed one. See that? So you might want to just rotate around a little bit sometimes just to make sure that you don't miss anything. It's most common when you put something new on a vessel. It's the most common thing is you forget to wire up the electricity and you wonder why it's not working. Always check your electrics. Now there's these 2 push buttons here. They need to be wired in for the lights and so on. And there's also the starter button here. That needs to be wired in. So when you throw this switch, it will activate all these systems. Until you throw that switch, nothing will work. The start button won't work, the lights won't work, the display won't light up, nothing. Now the other thing to consider is this. This is the fuel connector. This is to do with refueling. This is where you connect the fuel hose to refuel the vessel. And when you use this button here, this button will release the connector. It's like a magnetic hose. And when you press this, it'll disconnect it. Now, if you link this up to the main breaker, what that means is you can't refuel unless you throw the main breaker. What I like to do is wire the battery straight to the fuel connector. That way I don't need to turn on the systems in order to refuel. It's very handy when you spawn a boat, just being able to run over, drop the hose in, refuel it. It won't take much power from the battery. It certainly won't flatten it. Finally, there's the generator itself. The generator must wire into the battery. All of its power goes into this battery. That's the only connection that needs. The last thing we need to do is just wire up all the rest of the systems. So the engine, the clutch, the gearboxes, the rudder, and the lights at the back all come from the breaker. You can see that almost everything is driven from the breaker. Everything else is connected straight to the battery. As you build a more complex system, you'll find yourself wanting to break this up a bit. You don't want to have wires going all the way down the length of a huge boat. So what I would do in that case is I would use more than one breaker, or later on use a relay, which we don't have unlocked yet. So that's the electrical system. Now we go on to the logic system. I will show you this though first, the rope system. The rope at the moment is just being fleshed out. This is fairly new stuff. At the moment it's pretty much cosmetic. But if you put down this rope nodes here, you can create rope pieces. And when you spawn the boat in, you'll see some like rope pieces just sagging here. At the moment it's just mostly cosmetic, but it does look quite nice. But that's what that node's for. We will not get into these. Audio and video. You can transmit audio and video across, well, distances. You can transmit a camera from one island to a video feed on another. You can have camera screens on your boat with cameras going out the back, and you can basically see what's behind you and all that. Like, there's no limit to what you can do here. We won't even touch any of that. No one would touch fluid and power at the moment. Composite is a bit like a fiber optic cable. It allows you to send lots of data down one pipe. For now, we're going to focus on this one. This is the most two you will use are electric and data. The green dots represent data. The red dots represent control. So the red is quite literally signals, if you like, and the green are numbers. The big circles are inputs and the little circles are outputs. So look at this. I've already wired this up here. When you press this button, it will send a signal from here to the input of this thing. What that will do is when you press that button, it will cause this thing to fire, which disconnects the fluid connector. That's what it does. That's what red does. It sends a signal to something. So what kind of signals do we want to send? Well, the most obvious one is this one here, the engine start button. Where should that go? Let's go and look at our engine. Here's our engine here. It has a bunch of connections, but the only red one on it is this one, the engine on-off. Controls whether or not the engine is producing power. So we will connect the start on the engine to the start button on our engine button. So when you press that button there, it will cause the engine to start. It will crank the engine. That's one connection done. What about some other ones? Let's do a simple one. Let's say this one here, the display lights. These displays have backlighting, so at night they light up so that you can actually see the numbers. Remember this is display. So if we connect the display button to the backlight on the fuel, that will cause those numbers to light up at night. We can also cause the same button press to go to the backlights on the clutch and the throttle backlight. These are indicator lights. We're not going to wire up to these, and these are lights on the front of the boat. We don't want that. This one here is the boat light. When we press the boat light, we will light up the lights here, and the light here, and the two lights at the back. There you go. So all we did was said, well, when you press this button, and because it's a toggle, actually it was not a toggle button, was it? Okay, I just made a mistake, guys. Let me just quickly undo that. This is a push button. This needs to be a toggle button. So you switch it over to toggle, which means when you press it, it stays pressed, which is what we want. So we'll very quickly got to put the power back in. Like that. And then back on the data, we say, if you press this button here, which is display lights, and this one is bolt lights. Display lights will toggle backlighting on that, and the bolt lights will toggle the 4 bolt lights like that. There we go. So that should be it. That should be that wired in. Now what we could do is we could just quickly save this, and we can spawn it in and have a quick look. Now if you've got any holes in the boat, it will immediately sink. Just bear that in mind. But if we quickly sit in here, we can see that we've got a display reading there. It says fuel's got nothing on it, nothing there. If we press the bolt lights, nothing happens. We press the starter button, nothing happens. If we throw the breaker, it's on. Now when we press the display lights, it lights up. And when we press the bolt lights, press the tab key, you can see that all 4 lights have come on. So we know that's worked. And if you press this, it cranks the engine. Good times. Press the R to return it to the workbench. So we've now successfully created some wiring and we have some basic control of our boat. Fantastic. What else do we need to do? Click on the select tool and click on properties of the pilot seat. Let's just go through some of the controls we need. We don't need all of the controls on the pilot seat, but we'll use a few of them. A and D, left and right. We'll call that rudder. It will be in reset mode. Now what that means is there's reset and sticky. If you think about a rudder, if I hold the D key, I want it to steer to the right. And when I let go of the D key, I want the rudder to go back to where it was. That's what reset is. It means when you let go, I will reset back to my starting position. If you leave it on sticky, when you press the D key, it'll steer to the right. When you let go, it will stay in that position. I don't like sticky. I like it on reset. Sensitivity is how quickly it will move the rudder. This is something that you need to play with. 15% seems like a decent number. W and S is going to control the clutch. Why does it control the clutch? Because when I press the W key, I want my boat to go forward. Assuming the engine's running, pressing the W key will engage the clutch. The clutch will go from its 0 value to its 1 value and gradually feed the power to the propellers. I want this on sticky because if I move the clutch to full and let go, I want it to stay there. Hence why that is on sticky. 10% seems like a good number. Left and right, this is the left and right arrow keys I'm not using. Up and down arrow keys I've got on throttle. Sticky again, 10%. So the up and down arrow keys will control the engine throttle. So when you press the up arrow, you'll hear the engine spin up faster and faster. When you press the W key, it'll start to engage that engine power into the propeller. Propellers will start spinning. So this controls propeller speed. You could even call it propeller if you wanted to. Don't you spell propeller? Propeller? That looks wrong. And then there's hotkeys. Now the hotkey, for example, hotkey 1 is going to be a toggle, or is it going to be a push button? Toggle is the same as these toggle buttons here. You press it, it stays active until you turn it off again. So hotkey 1 is going to be high gear, and hotkey 2 will be reverse gear. We won't use the rest of them for now. Now that's important because we need to get the outputs matched now. When we go to the data line, we can find these red dots. There is the number 1 key. Hotkey 1, if you remember, hotkey 1 is the high gear line. And the high gear line is linked to this here. So when you press hotkey 1, we want to light this light and activate the clutch. So on logic, we'll go 1 goes to here to activate the light, and then 1 will also go to our first clutch, which is our high gear clutch. It activates the first ratio to the next ratio. Button number 2 will activate the reverse light and also activate the reverse gear clutch. Make sense? So when you press 1 or 2, it lights these lights and causes those gearboxes to switch. That's all that does. Really, really simple stuff. Right, now the green dots are the data feeds. The data feeds are the ones that, for example, let's do A and D. A and D is left and right. So it says here when you hover over it, outputs a standard value between -1 and 1 controlled using A and D. A causes the output value to move to -1 and D causes it to move to 1. Which is perfect for this because this by default displays a range between -1 and 1. So immediately we know that we can wire that up to here. Is that the throttle, A and D? No. Is that the clutch? Sorry, we don't want to display the left and right, do we? My bad. So we take A and D, which is left and right, and we pipe it to the rudder. Now, will the rudder turn the correct way? That's the question. Remember that if we press the A key, it tends towards -1. So it tends towards negative. which will be this way here, which will turn the rudder towards this, which is negative, which will turn us left. So it does appear to be wired up correctly. If it goes out the wrong way, you can basically invert the numbers, but usually that will work nicely. Let's do W and S. W and S, which was going to go to our clutch value, which we'll just call propeller. Propeller. Seriously, have I spelled that right? It's bugging me now. Propeller. I did spell it right. You know, you look at a word and you're like, that doesn't look right. Anyway, so W and S is going to go to the propeller display so we can see the position that it's in. Remember, it's a sticky thing. So that allows us to see what position it's currently in. That goes to, guess what, the clutch. A number between 0 and 1. In other words, when we press the S key and the number drops below 0, the clutch will ignore that. It doesn't care about negative numbers. It only wants 0, so that's why we're going to display it. It'll make sense in a second. Now, there is a display there, output from the generator. Data output giving the electrical generation. We're not going to display that, but you can get that feed if you want. You can also get the engine temperature and the engine RPS and display it if you wanted to. You can even get the battery charge. All of these are useful things, but not necessary. Okay, so the last thing is the up and down. The up and down on the arrow key controls the throttle on the engine. So we set that to there. We find the throttle, takes a number between -1 and 1. It controls forward-backward throttle of the engine, like that. And that is basically that, actually. Everything is wired up, I believe. So we should be able to start the engine up and actually make it do something. We're not going to get any display information, but we'll save that. We'll spawn it, and we'll see if this thing fires up. F to get in the captain's seat, throw the breaker, put the lights on. Right, first of all, W and S should move this lever, there you go, 1.0, all the way down to -1.0. So it seems like the sensitivity is on a decent setting. Let's try the throttle. That's the lightning. It's really annoying. Throttle is sensitivity wise good. So this is the engine throttle. So set the engine throttle to like 10% and we'll go for a start. Okay, now we can hear the engine ticking over, but we don't know what it's doing. Like if I press the throttle key, I know it's doing something, but I can't see what it is, right? What I need is to display the RPS so I can get an idea of what kind of RPS we're getting. But the engine starts, that's the main thing. So we quickly, what we'll do is go into here and we'll knock out a couple of blocks. Make sure you're not in symmetry, otherwise you'll knock those out as well. But let me show you a little trick. If you hold on the control key and click on an item, like this display here, it immediately puts that kind of item into your hand. So if I click the display, I'll get one of them. If I control click this, I'll get one of those. That can be really handy just for, instead of searching for items, you can just use that instead. Okay, so what we'll call this is engine RPS. And we'll just show it in decimals. We don't care about fractions. Maybe 1. Logic, first thing you should always do, go to electrics. Go to electrics. Always go to electrics first, because you will forget to wire it up. Now, it takes 2 things. It takes a backlight switch, which is this thing here. Not that one, this one. So we can get it backlit. And then the next thing it says, the value to display, which we can get from the engine itself. Engine RPS, there we go. Save that. Spawn. Jump in, press the F key, turn on the breakers, put the lights on, give it a bit of throttle, start the engine, look at the RPS. Now we can see what the boat's doing. Throttle up. So we can get a sense of how much our throttle is causing our RPS to change. If we max it out, it stops at 20 because you remember on the properties of the engine we set the maximum RPS to 20. So it won't blow up. That's the main thing. But you can also get readings of temperature and stuff if you want to be, you know, exacting so that you can see what kind of temperature. In a boat it doesn't matter because you get water cooling anyway, but in the air it tends to be, or on land in particular, you got to make sure you've got enough radiators so your engine doesn't get too hot. Right, so that's that. So there's one last thing that I want to show you because that is now an operational boat effectively. I mean, you can obviously go around and you can control click to get that grey and then paint it in, control click, paint that in. You can go around and just paint this thing up and make it look pretty. That's all cosmetic stuff. Functionally, it's now an operational boat. One last thing I want to do is show you just a very brief glimpse of a microcontroller, just to give you an idea of what you can do in the game. Now, I have already built one of these, but I'll just quickly show you the microcontroller editor. Now, in the microcontroller editor, you can build whatever logic you want. Essentially, what happens is you say, I want to have, for example, a number coming in and a number coming in, and I'm going to send a number out. Like that. So we've got two numbers coming in, one number going out, right? That's all. We've just defined our inputs and outputs here. Then we go to the actual logic button and we drag our inputs like that. And we have our outputs like that, and we can do something in between. We've got all these components to play with, all of this stuff. You can even do a Lua scripting block if you want to. Let's just say and add something like that. This is an add component. It takes two numbers and it adds them together. That's all it does. So if we have this component, whatever numbers we send into here, we'll add them together and send them out again. Very, very, very simple. There's many, many more things that you can do in here. Well, let me just show you why. Because what I've got here is a component that I've called a Fuel 8 adder. And this Fuel 8 adder, I'm going to put down, color it green. And I'm going to put one of them down. What does the Fuel 8 adder do? Well, if I get to this thing and load up my Fuel 8 adder, all I did was define 8 inputs and 1 output. And in my logic, I just add them all together, add, and output it. Why would I do this? Well, because if I want to display how much fuel I've got, I need to add the contents of each tank. So each tank outputs its contents like this. If I take the output of each tank and send it to each of these inputs, the output I can send to this display here. Okay, save that. And what do you know? 1495.1.0 as the boat rots, it moves around. Start the engine. And now when you're traveling around, you know exactly how much fuel you've got. That is a very, very simple logic system that just adds numbers up. But you can do all kinds of clever stuff. For example, I wrote a jet engine management system that basically, when you move a slider to say, I want you to be on 40% power, it manages the jet engine throttle and RPS and sets it to where you want it to be. It's quite cool stuff when you get it working. Anyway, that is the boat complete. So how do you drive it? Well, I showed you that in the first video really, but I'll briefly show you again. If we press forward or W on the keyboard, that will engage the propeller. Throttle will come down, so give it more gas. Bit more gas. And there you go. We are moving. We've got 17 RPS in our main gear, which is below the 20. and we're moving. If we press the 1 key, the high gear lights up, the engine RPS drops. Remember the ratio, 2 to 3. So that lowered the RPS of the engine. So the propellers are still turning, but the engine speed's much lower. The fuel consumption drops dramatically, but we're not going quite as quick. So if you wanted to, you're running low on fuel, and you just want to basically last, put it into the high gear. This will get you there, and just sip fuel. If you want to get there quickly, turn high gear off and go much quicker. Now there's other space here I've left to add more systems and sensors to the gameplay that we're doing, but I didn't want to add anything to this boat because I wanted you to be able to spawn it from the very, very beginning. But remember the research we were doing? Well, we've now researched navigation, so we could add some other stuff onto this boat now. And, for example, what speed are we going? Which direction on the compass are we heading? Well, we unlocked navigation and we unlocked sensors, and now we can put those things on the boat. But that is not going to be in this video. This video is now complete. I've showed you how to make your first boat, how to wire the electrics and the connection systems together, and hopefully you can take this and go and have a play with it. But that is it from me. I hope you enjoyed this 2-part video, guys. The next one, we'll kind of progress things a bit further and start adding some more components and do a mission and unlock some more stuff. And yeah, hopefully you'll learn some things on the way. If you give me feedback about the video, please, and the Stormworks, and whether you're enjoying it, that kind of thing, that'd be really, really useful. Until the next video, guys, though, take care and happy building.